Hey, everybody, and welcome back to English Podcast 2.0. Today, we're diving into something that I know a lot of you guys struggle with, and I've been there myself too sometimes.
Yeah.
It's that feeling where you can understand English pretty well, but when it comes to actually speaking it,
Right.
it's like a whole different ballgame.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's a really common experience for English language learners.
Okay.
They might feel confident in their reading and their listening skills, but when it's time to speak, they freeze up.
Yeah, it's like there's this invisible wall between understanding the language and actually, like, producing it, right?
Right.
So what is it about speaking that makes it so much harder for some people?
Well, a lot of it boils down to mindset.
Okay.
We create these mental barriers for ourselves
Uh-huh.
that prevent us from taking that leap and just speaking.
Okay, I'm really curious to unpack this.
Yeah.
What kind of mental barriers are we talking about here?
One of the biggest hurdles is the fear of making mistakes. So many learners are terrified of saying the wrong thing or mispronouncing a word or messing up the grammar. And they worry about being judged or even laughed at.
Right.
And that fear can be paralyzing.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
It's like nobody wants to sound silly or feel like they're not being taken seriously.
Right.
But isn't making mistakes a natural part of learning anything new?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, think about a child learning to walk.
Right.
They stumble and fall countless times before they can walk confidently. And
Yeah.
language learning is no different.
Totally.
We learn by experimenting and, yes, by making those inevitable mistakes.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, many of us internalize this idea that mistakes are bad,
Right.
and we start to avoid situations where we might make them.
So how do we break free from that fear?
Yeah.
How do we start seeing mistakes as opportunities for growth
Yeah.
rather than these, like, setbacks?
Well, the first step is acknowledging that perfection is an unrealistic goal, especially in the early stages of language learning. It's more helpful to focus on progress rather than perfection.
Okay.
Every time you speak, every time you try to express yourself in English, you're taking a step in the right direction.
So it's about celebrating those small victories along the way rather than beating ourselves up over every little mistake.
Precisely.
Okay.
And it's also important to remember that communication is about so much more than perfect grammar.
Yeah.
People are generally more interested in understanding your message, your ideas, and your intentions. They want to connect with you on a human level, and that connection can happen even if your grammar isn't flawless.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Like, even if you make a grammatical error, if your message is clear and, like, your enthusiasm is genuine,
Yeah.
people will still understand you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between striving for accuracy and allowing yourself to be imperfect,
Right.
to be a learner.
Okay, so we've talked about the fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
But are there other mental barriers that we need to be aware of?
Yes. Another common one is the tendency to compare ourselves to others.
Oh, yeah.
We see native speakers or more advanced learners and think, wow, I'll never be that good.
Right.
And that kind of comparison can be incredibly discouraging.
Oh, I've totally been there.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in that trap of feeling inadequate,
Right.
especially when you're bombarded with images and videos of people speaking English fluently and effortlessly online.
Yeah.
It can make you feel like you're not progressing fast enough.
It's natural to compare ourselves to others, but it's
Yeah.
important to remember that everyone's language learning journey is different.
Right.
We all have different strengths, weaknesses, learning styles, and backgrounds. So instead of comparing ourselves to others, it's much more productive to focus on our own individual progress.
So it's like, instead of looking at how far we still have to go, we should look back at how far we've already come and celebrate those achievements, no matter how small they might seem.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's all about shifting our perspective from a place of self-criticism
Right.
to a place of self-compassion and encouragement.
Okay, so we've covered fear of mistakes and the tendency to compare ourselves to others. Are there any other mental roadblocks that we should be aware of when it comes to speaking English?
Yes, there is another common one, and that's overthinking.
Okay.
Many learners get stuck in this cycle of mentally translating every word from their native language to English before they speak.
It's like our brains are working overtime,
Yeah,
but the words just aren't coming out.
exactly.
Yeah.
That mental translation process can be incredibly slow and stressful.
Great.
It often leads to hesitation, which can then make us feel even more self-conscious.
So how do we overcome that overthinking and start speaking more spontaneously?
Yeah.
Is there a way to, like, train our brains to think directly in English?
Well, there are definitely strategies you can use to get your brain more accustomed to processing information in English. One surprisingly effective technique is to start thinking in English more often.
Wait, just thinking.
Yeah.
How does that help with speaking?
It might sound simple, but it can have a powerful impact.
Okay.
Instead of constantly translating from your native language, try describing your surroundings in English in your mind.
So, for example, if I'm walking down the street and I see a beautiful flower, instead of thinking, that's a pretty flower in my native language, I should try to think, that's a lovely flower in English.
Exactly. It might feel a bit strange at first,
Right.
but it's like a mental workout for your brain. It helps you get used to forming thoughts and expressing ideas directly in English, which can then make speaking feel more natural and less effortful.
That's a really cool tip. I'm definitely going to try that.
Yeah.
It's like I'm creating an inner monologue in English.
Yeah.
Which can then hopefully translate into more confident speaking.
That's the idea. It's about creating a mental environment where English is not just something you're studying, but something you're actively using to think and process the world around you.
Okay, so thinking in English is one way to overcome overthinking. What are some other practical strategies that we can use to boost our speaking confidence?
Another really simple but effective technique is to talk to yourself out loud.
You're telling me to have conversations with myself.
Maybe a little.
Well, people think I'm crazy.
But trust me, it works. You can talk about your day, your plans, your thoughts, your feelings, anything that comes to mind.
So I could be like, what should I make for dinner tonight?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try that new pasta recipe I saw online.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The key is to just get those words flowing out of your mouth. Don't worry about making mistakes or sounding perfect.
Right.
Just focus on expressing yourself.
It's like giving myself permission to be a beginner again, to play with the language and have fun with it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about creating a safe space for yourself to practice and experiment without the pressure of an audience.
Okay, I'm starting to see the value in talking to myself.
Good.
But what if I'm feeling a bit more adventurous?
Yeah.
What if I want to challenge myself with something a bit more advanced?
Then you might want to try a technique called shadowing.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
What exactly is shadowing?
It's basically mimicking native speakers.
Okay.
You can do this with podcasts, movies, YouTube videos, audiobooks, really anything where you have a clear audio track of someone speaking English.
So I would pick a short clip,
listen
to it carefully, and then try to repeat it exactly as I hear it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Try to copy their pronunciation, their rhythm, their intonation, everything. It's like you're trying to become their voice double.
That sounds like a fun challenge. But how does shadowing actually help with speaking?
Well, it trains your ear to pick up on the nuances of spoken English.
Okay.
It helps you internalize those sounds and patterns that are often difficult to learn just from reading or listening passively. Plus, it can help you improve your pronunciation and fluency because you're essentially practicing speaking in chunks rather than individual words.
I love that.
Yeah.
So it's like a workout for my tongue and my brain at the same time.
Exactly.
What other solo speaking power moves do we have in our arsenal?
Another great technique is to ask yourself questions and then answer them out loud in English.
It's like I'm interviewing myself.
Exactly.
Very cool.
You can ask yourself things like, what did I do today? What am I grateful for?
Yeah.
What are my goals for this week?
Yeah.
It's a simple but effective way to get your brain thinking and responding in English, just like you would in a real conversation.
It's like I'm creating my own personal English speaking practice session tailored to my interests and experiences.
Right. That's awesome. And finally, a great way to track your progress is to record yourself speaking.
I've heard about this before, but I always feel a bit awkward listening to my own voice.
I understand.
Yeah.
But it can be incredibly revealing. When you listen back to a recording of yourself speaking, you might notice things you wouldn't have caught otherwise. Like pronunciation patterns you need to work on, or grammatical errors you tend to make.
So I could record myself talking about a topic I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Maybe for a minute or two, and then listen back and see how I did.
Exactly.
Right.
It's a great way to identify areas where you can improve and celebrate your progress over time.
Okay, so we've got a bunch of solo speaking strategies, which is great for those times when we don't have anyone to practice with.
Yeah.
But let's be real. Speaking a language is all about connecting with other people.
Right.
So how do we find opportunities to have real conversations with other English speakers?
Well, the good news is there are tons of opportunities to connect with other English speakers these days, even if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
What are some of those opportunities?
Have you ever tried language exchange apps?
Like those apps where you connect with people who want to learn your native language and you teach them while they teach you English?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
There are so many great apps out there these days that make it easy to find language partners from all over the world.
That's such a fun way to connect with people from different cultures and learn about their experiences while also practicing your English. What other opportunities are there?
Online communities are another fantastic resource.
Okay.
There are countless Facebook groups, Discord servers, Reddit forums, and even WhatsApp groups dedicated to English language learning.
I bet those are great places to find people who are at a similar level to you and have similar goals.
Right. And some groups even organize online events like conversation practice sessions or language cafes where you can chat with people in a more relaxed and social setting.
That's awesome. So even if you don't have English speakers in your immediate circle, you can still find a supportive and engaging community online.
Exactly. But what if you're not quite ready to jump into live conversations just yet?
I know some people get nervous about speaking in front of others,
Yeah.
especially when they're still building their confidence.
I understand in that case, a great stepping stone is to start by leaving voice messages instead of texting.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So if I'm in a language exchange group and someone asks how my day was, I could send a short voice message instead of typing a response.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a low-pressure way to get comfortable with speaking and recording your voice.
And it's a bit more personal and engaging than just text, right?
Exactly. You can convey your tone and your emotions more effectively through your voice, which can help you build stronger connections with people. Now, if you do have friends or classmates who are also learning English,
Yeah.
another great option is to find a speaking buddy.
It's like a workout buddy, but for language learning.
Exactly. I like that.
You can schedule regular calls to chats, practice specific topics you're learning in class, or even just watch a movie together in English and discuss it afterward. I love that idea. And even if you can only squeeze in 10 or 15 minutes a day, it's still super valuable practice.
Absolutely. Consistency is key when it comes to language learning.
Right.
Even short bursts of practice can make a big difference over time.
Okay, so we've covered apps, online groups, and speaking buddies.
Yeah.
Are there any offline opportunities to practice speaking English, out in the real world?
Absolutely. If you live in a city or town that has English-speaking tourists or expats, try striking up conversations with them.
I bet they'd appreciate the effort.
Most likely, even brief interactions like ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions can help you build confidence and get used to using English in everyday situations.
It's all about finding ways to incorporate English into your daily life.
Yeah.
Even in small ways.
Exactly. And if you're looking for a more structured setting,
Okay.
you could also join an English club or conversation group in your local community.
I bet those are great places to meet people who share your passion for learning English and also have fun while practicing.
They are, and they often offer a mix of social activities and language learning opportunities, like movie nights, game nights, or even weekend trips.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So even if we don't have native English speakers all around us, there are still so many ways to find speaking opportunities and connect with other learners.
Exactly. It just takes a bit of creativity and initiative.
Okay, so we've talked about mindset shifts,
Yeah.
practical speaking tips, and finding opportunities for real conversations. But let's be honest, there are going to be times when we feel discouraged or stuck.
Right.
How do we deal with those moments?
Yeah.
How do we keep ourselves motivated and prevent ourselves from giving up?
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
It's totally normal to hit a plateau
Right.
or feel frustrated when we're learning something new, especially with something as complex as language learning.
Especially since language learning is a long-term process, right?
Exactly.
Not something you can just master overnight.
And I think it's important to remember that motivation will naturally ebb and flow. There will be times when you're super enthusiastic and motivated.
Right.
And there will be times when you feel like you're not making any progress at all. And that's okay.
So how do we navigate those dips in motivation? How do we keep ourselves going when we feel like giving up?
Well, one thing that can be helpful is to remember why you started learning English in the first place.
Okay.
What are your goals?
Uh-huh.
What do you want to be able to do with the language?
Like, do you want to travel the world and communicate with people from different cultures? Or do you want to advance in your career? Or maybe you just want to be able to enjoy movies and music in English?
Exactly. Reconnecting with those goals can help you reignite that spark of motivation.
Okay.
And it can also help you to stay focused and avoid getting sidetracked.
It's like having a compass that points you in the right direction when you feel lost or uncertain.
Precisely. And another thing that can be helpful is to find a learning style that works for you.
Okay.
Not everyone learns in the same way.
So if you're a visual learner, maybe you should focus on watching movies or using flashcards. Or if you're an auditory learner, maybe you should listen to podcasts or music. And if you're a kinesthetic learner, maybe you should try role-playing or acting out dialogues.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Finding a learning style that aligns with your natural strengths and preferences can make learning more enjoyable and effective.
Okay, so we've talked about remembering our goals and finding our learning style.
Yeah.
What other tips do you have for staying motivated?
Another thing that can be really helpful is to break down your goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
It's like instead of focusing on the huge mountain you have to climb,
Yeah.
you focus on taking one step at a time.
Exactly. So, for example, if your goal is to be able to have a conversation with a native speaker for 5 minutes, start by practicing simple greetings and introductions.
Okay.
Then work your way up to asking and answering basic questions.
And so on. Breaking it down into smaller steps makes the process less daunting and more achievable, right?
Exactly. And it also allows you to celebrate those small wins along the way,
Yeah.
which can help you stay motivated.
It's like instead of waiting for that big moment of fluency, you're constantly rewarding yourself for your efforts and your progress.
Right. And another thing that can be helpful is to find a language learning community.
We talked about online communities earlier,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing offline communities can be just as valuable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whether it's a local English conversation group, a language exchange meetup, or even just a group of friends who are also learning English, having a supportive community can make a big difference.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders who are there to encourage you, motivate you, and celebrate your successes.
Exactly. And it can also provide you with opportunities to practice your speaking skills in a relaxed and supportive environment.
Okay, so we've covered remembering our goals, finding our learning style, breaking down our goals into smaller steps, and finding a supportive community. Any other motivation tips?
Yes. One more thing. Don't be afraid to reward yourself.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
What kind of rewards are we talking about?
Anything that motivates you.
Okay.
Maybe it's watching your favorite English language TV show, listening to your favorite English language music, or treating yourself to a nice meal at a restaurant where you can practice ordering in English.
It's like giving yourself a little incentive to keep going.
Exactly. And it can also help you associate language learning with positive emotions,
Right.
which can make the whole process more enjoyable.
Okay, so we've talked about how to stay motivated when the going gets tough. But what about those times when we feel like we're putting in the effort, but we're not seeing any progress?
Yeah.
How do we deal with that feeling of being stuck?
That feeling of being stuck is super frustrating.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that progress isn't always linear. Sometimes it happens in small increments behind the scenes.
It's like a seed growing underground.
Yeah.
We don't see the roots spreading, but eventually the plant will sprout.
That's a perfect analogy. And a great way to stay motivated during those times when you feel like you're not making progress is to track your progress.
Okay.
Remember we talked about recording yourself speaking earlier?
Yes. It felt a bit awkward at first, but I can see how it would be helpful to listen back to those recordings and see how much I've improved over time.
Right. If you record yourself today and then listen back a month or two from now, you'll probably be amazed by how much you've improved.
It's like having concrete evidence of your growth.
Exactly. And another powerful way to stay motivated is to celebrate your small wins.
I love that. What kind of small wins are we talking about?
Maybe you were able to have a short conversation with a native speaker without getting too flustered. Or maybe you finally nailed a pronunciation that you've been struggling with. Or maybe you understood a whole episode of your favorite podcast without subtitles.
It's about recognizing and appreciating those little victories along the way, rather than focusing on how far we still have to go.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on how far you still have to go, try to focus on how far you've already come.
That's such a great reminder.
Yeah.
And it's so much more encouraging than constantly comparing ourselves to others.
Absolutely. And finally, let's not forget that learning English should be enjoyable.
Preach. There's no point in torturing ourselves with boring textbooks or grammar drills if we're not having fun.
Right. So make sure you're incorporating activities that you genuinely enjoy, whether it's watching movies, listening to music, reading books, chatting with friends, or traveling to new places.
When you're having fun, you're more likely to stick with it and make real progress.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot between challenge and enjoyment.
This has been so insightful.
Mm.
I feel like I've already learned so much about the mental game of speaking English.
Good.
But I'm eager to hear more practical tips and strategies for actually putting these ideas into action.
Me too. We've only just scratched the surface, so we've talked about those mental barriers that hold us back from speaking English fluently. But now let's dive into some practical strategies to overcome those barriers and boost our speaking confidence.
Yes. I'm ready for some actionable tips. What are some things we can start doing today to improve our speaking skills?
Well, we've already touched on one really important strategy, and that's thinking in English.
Right. We talked about how describing our surroundings in English can help us get used to forming thoughts and expressing ideas directly in the language.
Exactly. It's like creating an internal English speaking environment in your mind.
But how do we actually do that? It sounds great in theory, but it can be hard to know where to start.
One simple technique is to start narrating your daily activities in English, even if it's just silently in your head.
So for example, if I'm making breakfast, I can say to myself, okay, first I'm going to pour some cereal into a bowl, then I'll add some milk, and finally I'll slice up a banana.
Exactly. It might feel a bit silly at first, but the more you do it, the more natural it will become.
It's like I'm giving my brain a workout in English.
Precisely. And as you get more comfortable with this, you can start to think in English about more complex topics.
Like I can think about my plans for the day, or a news article I read, or even a dream I had.
Exactly. The key is to find opportunities to use English actively rather than just passively absorbing it.
Okay, so thinking in English is a great way to lay the groundwork for more fluent speaking. But what about actually getting those words out of our mouths?
Well, we've already discussed the benefits of talking to yourself.
Right, it can feel a bit awkward at first, but it's a safe and private way to practice speaking without judgment.
Exactly. And it's a great way to warm up your vocal cords and get your brain in speaking mode before you have a real conversation.
But what if I want to practice specific skills like pronunciation or grammar?
That's where shadowing comes in.
Right, we talked about how shadowing involves mimicking native speakers.
Exactly. It's an incredibly effective way to improve your pronunciation fluency and even your comprehension.
But how do we choose the right materials to shadow? Should we focus on materials that are at our level, or should we challenge ourselves with something more advanced?
It's good to find a balance. Start with materials that you can understand relatively well so you're not completely lost. But don't be afraid to stretch yourself a bit with materials that are slightly above your level.
So, for example, if I'm at an intermediate level, I could start by shadowing podcasts or videos that are designed for intermediate learners. But I could also try shadowing excerpts from movies or TV shows that I enjoy, even if I don't understand every single word.
Exactly. The key is to find materials that are engaging and motivating for you, so you'll stick with it.
Okay, so we've got thinking in English, talking to ourselves, and shadowing. What other practical techniques can we use to improve our speaking skills?
Another great technique is to record yourself speaking.
I know we talked about this earlier in terms of tracking progress, but can recording ourselves also help us improve our speaking in real time?
Absolutely. When you record yourself speaking, you become more aware of your own voice, your pronunciation, and your overall fluency.
It's like holding up a mirror to your speaking habits.
Exactly. And by listening back to those recordings, you can identify areas where you need to improve.
So, for example, I might notice that I tend to mumble certain words, or that I pause too often, or that I have a hard time pronouncing certain sounds.
Exactly. And once you've identified those areas, you can start to work on them specifically.
So I could try practicing those words or sounds that I'm having trouble with, or I can try to speak more slowly and clearly.
Precisely. Recording yourself speaking allows you to become your own teacher and coach.
It's a really empowering thought.
It is. And it's a technique that you can use throughout your language learning journey, no matter what level you're at.
Okay, so we've got a lot of great strategies for practicing speaking on our own. But at some point, we need to start having real conversations with other English speakers.
Absolutely. Speaking a language is all about communication, and the best way to improve your communication skills is to communicate.
But what if we don't have a lot of opportunities to interact with native English speakers in our daily lives?
Well, there are plenty of ways to create those opportunities.
Like what?
Well, we've already discussed the benefits of language exchange apps and online communities.
Right. Those are great ways to connect with other English learners and native speakers from all over the world.
Exactly. And there are also plenty of offline opportunities to practice speaking English.
Like what?
Well, if you live in an area with English-speaking tourists or expats, try striking up conversations with them.
I know that can feel intimidating, but I guess even short interactions like asking for directions or ordering food can help us build confidence.
Absolutely. And most people are happy to help language learners. They appreciate the effort you're making.
Okay, so we can practice our speaking skills with tourists and expats. What other offline opportunities are there?
Well, you could join an English conversation club or language exchange meetup.
Those sound like fun and supportive environments to practice speaking.
They are. And they often organize social events like movie nights or game nights where you can practice your English in a more relaxed setting.
That's awesome. So even if we don't have a lot of native English speakers in our immediate circle, we can still find opportunities to practice speaking and immerse ourselves in the language.
Exactly. It just takes a little effort and creativity.
Okay, so we've got a lot of great strategies for practicing speaking both on our own and with others. But let's face it, language learning can be a long and challenging process.
It definitely can be. There will be times when you feel frustrated, discouraged, or even like giving up.
So how do we stay motivated when the going gets tough? How do we prevent ourselves from throwing in the towel?
Well, one of the most important things is to remember why you started learning English in the first place. What are your goals? What do you want to be able to do with the language?
Like, do you want to travel the world and communicate with people from different cultures? Or do you want to advance your career? Or maybe you just want to be able to enjoy movies and music in English without subtitles.
Exactly. Reconnecting with those goals can help you reignite that spark of motivation and remind you why you're putting in the effort.
It's like having a North Star to guide you when you feel lost or unsure of your direction.
Precisely. And another important thing is to celebrate your progress no matter how small it may seem.
Right, we talked about the importance of celebrating those small wins earlier.
Exactly. It's so easy to focus on how far we still have to go, but it's equally important to acknowledge how far we've come.
So instead of beating ourselves up over our mistakes, we should try to pat ourselves on the back for every step we take in the right direction.
Exactly. And it's also important to find a learning style that works for you.
Right, we're all different and we all learn in different ways.
Precisely. So if you're a visual learner, you might benefit from watching movies or using flashcards. If you're an auditory learner, you might prefer listening to podcasts or music. And if you're a kinesthetic learner, you might enjoy role-playing or acting out dialogues.
It's all about finding what works best for you and tailoring your learning approach to your individual needs.
Exactly. And another helpful tip is to break down your goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right. It's less daunting to focus on taking one step at a time rather than trying to climb the whole mountain at once.
Precisely. So, for example, if your goal is to be able to hold a 5-minute conversation with a native speaker, start by practicing simple greetings and introductions.
Then gradually work your way up to asking and answering basic questions and so on.
Exactly. Breaking down your goals into smaller steps makes the process feel less overwhelming and more achievable.
And it also gives you more opportunities to celebrate your successes along the way, which can help you stay motivated.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of community.
Right. We talked about the value of online communities earlier, but I'm guessing offline communities can be just as beneficial.
They definitely can be, whether it's a local English conversation group, a language exchange meetup, or even just a group of friends who are also learning English. Having a supportive community can make a big difference.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders who are there to encourage you, motivate you, and celebrate your successes with you.
Exactly. And it can also provide you with opportunities to practice your speaking skills in a relaxed and supportive environment.
That's so important because let's be real, putting yourself out there and speaking a new language can be nerve-wracking, especially in the beginning.
It definitely can be. But remember, everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers.
Right. It's all part of the learning process.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Embrace them as opportunities to learn and grow.
I love that. It's about shifting our perspective from seeing mistakes as failures to seeing them as valuable feedback.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of remembering our goals, celebrating our progress, finding a learning style that works for us, breaking down our goals into smaller steps, finding a supportive community, and embracing our mistakes.
That's a lot to take in.
It is, but I think it all boils down to one key message. Don't give up on yourself. Keep practicing, keep learning, and keep believing in your ability to achieve your language goals.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
I know we've already covered a lot of ground, but do you have any other words of wisdom to share with our listeners before we move on?
I do. Remember to be patient with yourself. Learning a new language takes time and effort. It's not a race, it's a marathon.
That's such a good reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in the idea that we need to learn English quickly. But the truth is, it's a lifelong journey.
Exactly. And it's a journey that's filled with ups and downs, twists and turns.
But it's a journey that's ultimately rewarding and enriching.
Absolutely. Learning a new language opens up a whole new world of possibilities. It allows you to connect with people from different cultures, experience new things, and expand your horizons.
I couldn't agree more. So embrace the journey, enjoy the process, and don't forget to have fun along the way.
Well said.
I'm so glad we had this conversation. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on speaking English, and I'm excited to put these strategies into practice.
Me too.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, do you have any specific challenges or exercises that our listeners can try out to solidify what they've learned today?
I do. For those who are feeling brave, I challenge you to record yourself speaking for just 1 minute about any topic that interests you. It could be your hobbies, your dreams, your favorite food, anything at all.
That's a great idea. It's a low-pressure way to practice speaking and get used to the sound of your own voice in English.
Exactly. And for those who are looking for a more structured activity, I recommend trying out the shadowing technique. Choose a short audio clip from a podcast, movie, or TV show and try to mimic the speaker as closely as possible.
Those are both fantastic challenges. I'm excited to see what our listeners come up with.
Me too.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from mindset shifts to practical tips to finding speaking opportunities.
It's been a whirlwind of information.
It has. But I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about, a lot of tools to help them on their journey to speaking English more confidently.
I agree.
Well, I think that's a great place to pause for now. But stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore even more strategies for overcoming those pesky speaking barriers and unleashing your inner English speaker.
I can't wait.
Welcome back to English Podcast 2.0. I am so excited to continue our deep dive into speaking English more confidently.
Me too. I think our listeners are ready for the final boost to help them unlock their English speaking potential.
I think you're right. We've talked about so many valuable strategies already, from mindset shifts to practical tips to finding speaking opportunities. But before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. You talked about the importance of embracing mistakes as part of the learning process.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize this enough. Mistakes are not the enemy. They're actually our best teachers.
I love that perspective. But I know a lot of learners struggle with this. They feel embarrassed or ashamed when they make mistakes, and it can really hold them back from speaking freely.
I understand that feeling completely, but it's so important to remember that everyone makes mistakes when they're learning a new language. It's a natural part of the process. In fact, if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough.
That's a great point. So how can we shift our mindset to see mistakes as opportunities for growth rather than setbacks?
Well, one helpful strategy is to reframe the way we think about mistakes. Instead of seeing them as failures, we can see them as valuable feedback. Every mistake we make gives us information about what we need to work on.
So it's like each mistake is a little clue that helps us improve our skills.
Exactly. It's like having a personal language coach pointing out areas where you can refine your pronunciation, grammar, or vocabulary.
I love that analogy. But it can still be hard to overcome that initial feeling of embarrassment when we make a mistake, especially in front of others.
That's true. It's natural to feel a bit self-conscious when we make mistakes, especially in social situations. But here's the thing. Most people are much more forgiving and understanding than we give them credit for.
I think you're right. We often put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect. But in reality, most people are just happy to communicate and connect. They don't care if we make a few mistakes along the way.
Exactly. And in fact, many people will actually appreciate your effort to learn their language, even if you're not perfectly fluent. They'll likely be impressed by your willingness to step outside of your comfort zone and try something new.
So instead of focusing on our fear of judgment, we should focus on the joy of connection and the satisfaction of making progress, even if it's messy and imperfect.
Absolutely. And remember, every time you speak English, even if you make mistakes, you're getting closer to your goal of fluency. You're building confidence, expanding your vocabulary, and refining your pronunciation.
It's like every time we speak, we're planting a seed that will eventually blossom into fluency.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And speaking of planting seeds, I wanted to share one final strategy that can be incredibly helpful for language learners.
I'm all ears.
It's called immersion.
I've heard that term before, but can you explain what it means in the context of language learning?
Of course, immersion simply means surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible. It's about creating an environment where you're constantly exposed to English, even outside of your dedicated study time.
So it's like instead of just studying English for an hour a day, you're trying to incorporate it into your everyday life.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to make English a part of your daily routine, even in small ways.
That sounds like a fun challenge.
Yeah.
What are some practical ways that we can immerse ourselves in English?
Well, one easy way is to change the language settings on your phone and computer to English.
That's a great idea. I hadn't even thought of that.
It's a simple change, but it can make a big difference. You'll be constantly exposed to English vocabulary and grammar, even when you're just checking your emails or browsing social media.
It's like passively absorbing the language throughout the day.
Exactly. And speaking of passive absorption, another great way to immerse yourself is to listen to English language music and podcasts.
I love listening to podcasts. It's such a fun and engaging way to learn new things and improve my listening comprehension.
Absolutely. And you can find podcasts on pretty much any topic imaginable, so you're sure to find something that interests you.
So instead of listening to music or podcasts in my native language, I could switch over to English language content.
Exactly. And don't worry if you don't understand every single word at first. Just try to get the gist of what's being said and enjoy the rhythm and flow of the language.
And as my listening skills improve, I'll start to pick up more and more vocabulary and grammar.
Precisely. It's like a snowball effect. The more you expose yourself to the language, the faster you'll learn.
This is so inspiring. I'm already thinking of all the different ways I can incorporate more English into my daily life.
That's great to hear. And remember, immersion doesn't have to be a chore. It should be enjoyable.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
If we're not enjoying the process, we're less likely to stick with it.
Exactly. So find activities that you genuinely enjoy and that allow you to engage with English in a fun and meaningful way.
So if I love watching movies, I could start watching more English language films. Or if I love reading, I could start reading more English language books.
Precisely. And the great thing about movies and books is that they expose you to a wide range of vocabulary and grammar in a natural and engaging context.
It's like learning by osmosis.
Exactly. And another great way to immerse yourself is to travel to an English-speaking country if you have the opportunity.
I know not everyone has the chance to travel, but if you can, it's an incredible experience. It's like a language learning boot camp.
It really is. You're forced to use English in everyday situations, from ordering food to asking for directions to making new friends.
And you're also surrounded by the culture and the people, which can really bring the language to life.
Absolutely. So if you have the chance to travel even for a short trip, I highly recommend it.
This has been such an enlightening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for improving my English speaking skills. But before we wrap things up, do you have any final words of encouragement for our listeners who are on this journey to fluency?
Absolutely. First and foremost, believe in yourself. You have the ability to achieve your language goals no matter where you're starting from. Second, be patient. Fluency takes time and effort, so don't get discouraged if you don't see results overnight. And finally, have fun. Learning a language should be an enjoyable experience. So find activities that you enjoy, connect with other learners, and celebrate your successes along the way.
Those are wonderful words of advice. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I know our listeners have learned a lot from you.
It was my pleasure. I'm always happy to help language learners on their journey to fluency.
And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into speaking English more confidently. Remember, the key is to just start speaking. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Embrace those mistakes as opportunities for growth, and most importantly, have fun along the way.
Well said.
We hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Until next time, keep practicing, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself.
See you soon.